Hey guys.
Welcome to our podcast.
This week, we'll be talking about institutionalized racism. Institutionalized racism is a form of racism expressed in the practice of political institutions. It is the systematic distribution of resources, power, and opportunity in our society to the benefit of people who are white and the exclusion of people of color. In a basic definition, it is the process of purposely discriminating against certain groups of people through the use of biased laws or practices. Institutionalized racism is everywhere. You could probably find examples of it throughout history in almost every country. It is prevalent in housing, healthcare, and many other parts of life. You may look at charts and facts and see the plain proof of systematic racism. However, what can be done about it? Today, we'll have a discussion with experts in the field. Maricela and Shania are from the United States. Bianca and Chloe are from South Africa. Please pay attention to their responses and note down in your mind what can be done to solve this problem today. So to start off, I would like both teams of experts to give backgrounds on their respective topics.
So, when you think of racism in South Africa, apartheid should certainly come to mind. It was established in 1948 and it didn't end until 1994. And according to South Africa History Online, it called for the separate development of different racial groups. It was said to be equal, but it certainly was not. And there were laws stopping the integration of races in marriage, social integration. They were separated and forced to live in different neighborhoods, go to different schools. Basically, every aspect of life was separated by race.
Division followed blacks and colored people to the workplace. There were separated skills and positions. They weren't allowed to have management positions, and there was also separated bathrooms and eating areas.
Well, considering that institutionalized racism is the systemic distribution of resources, power, and opportunity in our society to benefit white people and to exclude people of color, it's essentially a system that has been put into place and implemented throughout the United States or wherever else that promotes white privilege. This is nothing more than people having an unfair disadvantage in life just because of something as simple as their skin color. In America, institutionalized racism is definitely responsible for slavery, Indian reservations, segregation, and even internment camps.
One of the major events that made an impact on institutionalized racism was the Civil Rights Movement, which was an organized effort by Black Americans to end racial discrimination. This movement began in the late 1940s and ended in the late 1960s. It was a movement to gain equal rights under the law, and although the civil rights abolished slavery, it didn't end discrimination against blacks. They continued to endure the effects of racism, and there were amendments that were put in place, such as the 14th Amendment, that gave blacks equal protection under the law, and the 15th Amendment, which finally granted blacks to be able to have the right to vote. However, many whites were unhappy that people they'd once enslaved were now given rights that they didn't have before.
It's crazy because even after all the laws stopped institutionalized racism, you can still see the impacts of it on society as well. And now that we have gone over the background, we will now consider the concerns and the impact institutionalized racism has on us today.
In America, some of the lasting effects of institutionalized racism include racial disparities in housing, employment, education, healthcare, a number of other sectors, including racial profiling done by, law enforcement workers, despite the number of laws and legislation that have been passed and implemented making, any type of discrimination illegal.
And also some shocking statistics are that 58% of prisoners are Black or Hispanic, which make up a quarter of the U.S. population. And 74% of Black students and 80% of Latino students attend schools that are more than half minority populations. In an article on institutionalized racism in the United States, Darren Martin, a former Obama White House staff member, says racial profiling is almost second nature now. Martin recounts when he had a neighbor call the police on him when he was trying to move into his own apartment. And how often when leaving a store he was always asked to empty out his pockets. he says that was dehumanizing. Minority suspects in one study showed that there's a 30% higher chance of being arrested than white suspects. A major inconsistency that comes as a result of institutionalized racism is the rates of poverty that are around the United States. In the year 2016, despite there not being a shortage of white people, they only accounted for 9% of those living in poverty in America, while blacks and Hispanics made up 42%. Can you see the difference?
And this means that institutionalized racism goes well beyond just, a professional setting, for it can be seen in almost all aspects of life. And this obviously means that those who are being discriminated against can't do anything about it, can't change it, no matter how badly they want to.
It's really interesting how many parallels there are between the U.S. and South Africa when it comes to racism, because after apartheid ended, there's still an unequal quality of life between blacks, colored people, and whites. The housing rates, healthcare, just pretty much everything is still not equal. And there's a lot of unemployment, and Bianca has some more information on that.
So according to Quartz Africa, 31.4% of blacks are unemployed as the majority. 22.9% of colors are unemployed, and in the minority, 6.6% of whites are unemployed. So this tells us that the majority of South Africans who are unemployed are the coloreds and the blacks.
So it's just obvious, even after the laws against racism, or the laws for racism were taken away, it's still all over the country still. So definitely an issue.
Now that we have gone over the background of systemic racism, and also we have gone over concerns and the way that impacts us today, we'll also go over potential solutions and ways that you can begin today to solve this problem.
So in South Africa, there are already organizations set in place to try to find a solution to the problem, and one that was created after the ending of apartheid was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and its goal was to provide amnesty for crimes committed during apartheid based on race. So this is just one way that they tried to even the playing field a little bit more. And right now there is something going on in South Africa that's a big deal.
Currently in South Africa, the South African government has voted to a motion that could lead to the seizure of land from white farmers without compensation. The Economics Fighter Party leader, Julia Malema, told the country's parliament, "We must ensure that we restore the dignity of our people without compensating the criminals who stole our land." The purpose of this motion is to resolve the issues of racial disparities in the country and to move South Africa forward from apartheid. While this might not be the greatest idea, it attempts to build the country back to what it was before.
We believe the main way to move past institutionalized racism and racism in general is just educate people, especially on the horrors of apartheid, so we don't repeat history.
A major event in American history that made progress to end institutionalized racism was the Brown versus Board of Education, which determined that separate was not equal, opposite to what was stated in Plessy v. Ferguson, which established that there was equality and separation of American people.
Although we continue to see institutionalized racism in today's society, you can still have an impact on your future of this country by making your voice heard by voting and standing for what is right.
You have now learned all there is to know about institutionalized racism. We hope you enjoyed the podcast, and we ask that you step forward and put into action what you learned today. Thank you very much.
Bye.